Hi, good evening, everyone. Um, if you join me now, thank you for joining me for today's event. We've been on a journey for the 3 weeks now, and we've gotten to, well, we could say one of our destinations, right, as regard discussing contracts. Yeah. So essentially, our discussion today will center around exit. How do you exit the contract? We've discussed how a contract is formed. We've discussed what the terms of a contract could be. But for today, we want to focus on how do you exit a contract? And there are various ways that becomes, and there are various issues that we'll have to look at in discussing how to exit contracts. And that is very important. Essentially, in our discussion of contract, like I've been mentioned, I recall making mention that, of course, every contract must have at least two persons. But in its simple terms, every contract must have two parties, right? Um, who I'll prefer to call A or B. So there will be A and then there will be B in every contract. Every contract must have that, right? Now, what happens generally in every contract is some contract might be the every contract, of course, creates what is called obligations. In other words, what A has to do, and what B has to do. Every contract creates that obligations. So, but there is always a hierarchy, something called a hierarchy of obligations. In other words, you could have a contract where A has to perform certain responsibilities or obligations before B's own kick into being. Let me give an example. An example will be where A decides that, let's take this contract for example, a website development. Yes, a contract for you to develop uh, um, a contract for you to develop a website, right? And in the contract for you to develop the website, um, for the contract for you to develop the website, what you have will be um, A contracts B to develop a website for C, for A contract B to develop a website for B, and B agrees to develop the website, right? Now, but payment for the website will depend on A when B completes the contract. Let me not get all that twisted. Let me just get it straightened up. A contracts B to develop a website for A. So B is the web developer. A is the party that needs the contract to be developed, right? So A now says, or part of the contract term is that this contract becomes A will pay B when B completes developing the website, right? So B's obligation it's must comes first. So A obligation to pay B is dependent on when A on when B has completed the website. You have that kind of contract, right? So so that means in that kind of contract, A's obligations, well, the payment will not take place until B has completed his contract. Now that's one type of contract. In another type of contracts, both of them will have to perform their obligations at the same time. What do I mean? What do I mean? Perform their obligations at the same time. Let's take an example of you go to the not really the market, but I think we use that all the time. We you you want to transfer money, yeah. You want to transfer money from A's account to B's account in a form. That's a form of contract that if you have sufficient funds in your account, it will lead to whoever you're transferring your money to. So I decided to transfer money to Ngozi's account, and I go to my app and I initiate the transaction. It takes place immediately. So I initiate that from whatever backend they need to work on, whatever they need to work on the other side, they work on it, and the transaction sails through. So that's the end of the contract, right? We performed our obligations at both times. Our obligations, I didn't have to send the money, sit down, wait. Bina needed to transfer his money. The bank now needed to transfer the money. No, it was done seamlessly and at virtually the same time. So you have contracts where both parties will have to perform their contract at the same time. In those kind of contracts, so those kind of contracts I have described, the one that the obligations comes before, one's obligation comes before another, or the ones that the obligation are simultaneously. Each of them have issues when we are discussing how to end a contract. Both of them have issues when we're discussing how to end the contract. So, but that's just the introduction. So let's go to, in discussing, let's go to how then does the law stipulate that, or how does the law provides that you can exit a contract? Basically, there are 4 ways that the law provides that you can exit a contract. One is by agreement. The second one is by breach. Of course, breach of the terms. Then the third one is by performance. And then the fourth one is by frustration. Okay. I'll repeat that again. There are 4 ways the law recognizes that you could breach a contract, that you could exit a contract. Okay. One of them, it's like I said, one of them is by agreement. That's the agreement of the parties to exit the contract. That's one. The second one is by performance of the contract obligations. Then the third one is by a breach of the contract. You notice I keep saying and, yes. Then the fourth one really is frustration. And that's the one I really find, that's the one that seems to apply mostly in this post-COVID era. But in understanding how contracts can end, right, you will need to understand that you could group it into 2 forms. One, contract can end by acts of the parties. Then contract can end by non-acts of the parties. That's not English, but that helps you understand. In other words, parties can decide to end their contract, or the contract can be ended for them by another party. So let's look at the contract that can be ended by the parties. So let's begin with the first one, which is by performance. You know, I was giving the illustration that every contract creates what is called responsibility or obligation. So let me use the word responsibility. Creates responsibility on every party to that contract. Right now. So let me use an example of a website, for example, developing a website. So I, Austin, contract Felix to develop a website for me. I've given him specifications. So Felix develops the website. The agreement is that when Felix is done developing the website, that's when I can now, when Felix is done developing the website, then I can now pay Felix. So Felix is done developing the website and I pay him. What was Felix's responsibility to develop the website? What was my responsibility to pay him? So Felix is done developing the website and then I pay him. Okay, so that contract is over now. There's nothing remaining of the contract. So by performing what was agreed in the contract has ended. I mean, that's a very simple case. But then there's also another funny case. What of when one party performs part of the contract? What happens? So let's say Felix, in this example now, the contract stipulated that Felix will develop the website and host the website. So Felix develops the website and he doesn't host it. What happens? Right? Can we end the contract at that point? Because that's an important part. Okay, let me use Ngozi for example, because most of the time this issue comes from mostly builders, building contractors. So I contract Ngozi to build a house for me. Meanwhile, Ngozi is a fantastic person. So I hope she will not sue me for this. Oh, I didn't even mention anybody's surname. Okay, so Ngozi to build a house for me. I give her the specifications. So Ngozi builds the house to a particular point, right? But doesn't use some of the materials that stipulated that must be used. And then She says, okay, I'm done with my terms of the contract. I've done my own part of the contract. What happens? Right. What happens then? Was there a complete contract then? So what happens? Yeah, the law is very clear. The law really is that where substantial performance, right? When Ngozi, for example, has performed substantially the parts of the contract, like we agreed, she can be entitled to her to what the contract says I should give her if I accept it. Okay, let me rephrase that. In a situation like that, when Ngozi has performed substantially the parts of the contract, she is entitled to her pay less what it will require me to get somebody else to perform the contract. But in that instance, the contract has ended. So what then happens is I can decide not to accept it. If I decide not to accept it, that becomes another issue. But if I accept it, right? But if I accept that, okay, she's done this bit, all right, this other part doesn't work, blah, blah, blah. Okay, since this other part doesn't work, let her take her own, then I'll take the remaining money to engage someone to fix it in order. The law accepts that. But this is where the wahala will be for Ngozi. The law also allows me to sue Ngozi for damages because she did not perform the contract fully. So that's an intricate part when you're dealing with part performance. What I normally recommend for clients is to include a clause in the contract that stipulates that Ngozi will not be entitled to her full pay until she executes the contract in accordance with the specifications. When that is included in the contract, the provisions of part performance will not arise. Yeah. So that's the trick there. Okay, so the second way you can exit the contract, or a contracting parties can exit the contract, is by agreement. And I need to be careful here. A contract, in some of our other sections, I advise that put all your contracts in writing, right? Put all your contracts in writing. They are threatening me by the side. All right, put all your contracts in writing. I advise that you should put all your contracts in writing. All right. So another way you can exit the contract is by agreement. How does this really work? This works very interestingly. This is how this works, really. It works in this form. Two of us, right, agrees that, okay, remember the only time, please just remember that the only time we can exit a contract by another agreement is when both of us have not performed our obligations. In the instance I gave in second instance I was given about I and Ngozi. If Ngozi developed the house to the completion, to the specifications that we agreed, right? We cannot agree in that instance that the contract is over. We cannot agree because she has performed all her responsibility under the contract. So what is left for her then is for her to receive what I was supposed to pay her. So in that instance, by agreement will not apply, right? But in a situation where both of us have not performed part of the agreement, or we have performed some, we've not completed it, two of us can sit down and by agreement, let me use tautologically, by agreement, agree that all the other obligations we have to perform, we shouldn't perform it, that we want to end the contract at this point. So that is we are exiting the contract by an agreement. But it gets very tricky here. Remember I told you that there are some contracts that must be in writing, right? And I also said, I told you that there must be contracts in writing. But this is where it's interesting. The law says that even if the contract is in writing or has to be in writing, we can agree orally to exit the contract. But of course, that's also mean we can get an agreement to exit the contract. You know what I will always advise? I will advise that, of course, everything should be in writing because it makes your life easy and everybody understands the terms. So in instance like this, like let me use Felix's example I was given the other time. Phillips was supposed to develop the website and host it. Phillips had developed the website to an extent and didn't host it, right? Then I'm supposed to pay Phillips some money. So I decided to, okay, take half. The other half I won't pay you, right? Then the other half, so since you are not hosting it, the other half, so we sit down together and we agree, okay, Felix won't host. I will get someone to host it, but I will not pay him the full money. See, that's an agreement. So my obligations that I was supposed to do, what was my obligation? Pay Felix more money. That obligation, I'm not supposed to, I won't do that obligation. Then the one Philip is supposed to do, which is hosted, Philip will not do it because we have both agreed. But there's also another part of that agreement that I think we should also consider. In an instance where one party has discharged his obligation, let's say Philip has hosted the website, developed the website. Let me leave Ngozi alone. Philip has developed the website, hosted the website, but we then agree that the contract should end without me paying. This is what the law says. The law says that in that instance, when one party like Phillips has completed its obligations, I am bound for any agreement for us to discharge, for us to exit the contract, to end the contract. Something must move from me to Felix. I must give Felix something. Remember what we were talking about consideration, right? So there must be money or there must be value that moves from me to Phillips, since he has completed his agreement. That's what the law says. Right. So let's go to the third instance. Okay, you might want to ask, okay, so since it's a discussion, you might want to ask, so what do I advise most of the time? I guess again, it's still the same thing I like doing. Detail your agreements, right? In sense of let it be let what the other party is supposed to perform be thoroughly and expressly stated, and then also states what the consequences will be if the party performs up to this extent, up to this extent, or up to this extent. In that form, it guides you to be able to take a proper decision, irrespective of what the law says, because both of you have contracted. Right. So the third aspect then, it's the third way you could end a contract, it's by breach. Yes, of course, breach of contract. Remember our last discussion, we were talking about terms of contract. I mentioned that basically you could look at terms of contract in fundamental terms and then what is called condition. And I told you that the consequences for breaching a condition is that the party that did not breach the condition is entitled to damages. So, right? And then I told you that for fundamental terms, the party that didn't breach the fundamental term is entitled to damages, and the party can also end the contract. So breach of what is called fundamental term. If you were not here at the last section, you could listen to the you can listen to the audio or to the video where we explain what fundamental terms is. So if the party now breaches the fundamental term, the other party can then end the contract and also get damages. But there's a part of this breach that I need you I need a concept I need you to understand. There's a concept called waiver, and there's a concept called, okay, one concept is called waiver. There's another concept called variation. But let me talk about waiver. Now, a waiver means I don't want to consider this issue. So let's use an assumption. I asked Felix to develop that website. Felix developed the website, like I said, and didn't host it. I can waive that. Now you get the explanation. I can say, okay, no problem. I don't want to, no problem, Felix. I'll just pay your full money. So I have waived that. The law says that if I waive that, I can come back later on to unwaive it. Pardon my expression, but I can come back later on to unwaive it because I have already waived it. Now, so when you are contracting, you need to be careful about terms that constitute breaches and what you do with those terms. What we normally do when I'm drafting an agreement is there's always a paragraph that deals with waiver. And in that paragraph, I always indicate that if the other party or any party has done something that amounts to breach or amounts to so and so, my client, even if my client does not react within the specific time, my client's not reacting does not amount to a waiver. In that instance, my client is protected. So somebody can breach the term of the contract today, and my clients can react in the next 10, 40 years. That column, that space there, are taking care of that. All right. Okay. So back to the breach by breach. All right. So what entitles you to end a contract? What entitles you to end a contract? I'm meeting you. What entitles you to end a contract will be by breach, might be breach that is fundamental. And you remember what you say fundamental is? Breach that goes to the roots of the contract. That's what entitles you to end that contract. Right? Yes. Okay. Now, so remember we've now discussed three terms. We've discussed practically free, circumstance on which contracts can be ended. One, I said by breach. Two, by agreement. And three, by performance. And we'll explain circumstances and how you can go about it. The fourth one, it's not the parties that determine how the contract ends in that instance. The fourth one is called the doctrine of it's called frustration. And even the word itself, frustration, is very strong. But that one is called frustration. When you say a contract has been frustrated. Felix sent me something about it, yeah. But you know, the one that has been flying around during this the COVID period has been force majeure. I don't want to break head over force majeure, right? But let's okay, when I explain the conditions for the application of frustration in a contract, you will now understand that what they call force majeure does not apply. So what is frustration? Frustration basically means that the contract has been frustrated. It means in pidgin English, we're not going to feed them. You know, I must speak pidgin English. There's no way to escape that. It means in pidgin English, this contract no work. Let me use a physical example. And I use Felix's example. Felix is my guy. So let me use Felix. Felix supplies goods, right? And I say, Phillips, I'm building Ngozi. Okay, let me leave Ngozi. Phillips, I'm building so and so house. You'll be the one to supply me so and so ties and all that. Felix gets those materials from outside the country, right? So Felix gets his materials from outside the country. And so let's say we enter that agreement sometime in January this year. And Philip has, we entered it in February, and Philip has all to the end of March to bring in those ties. That was the agreement, all documented. Why that was going on, why Phillips was trying to do that, the federal government now came up with the regulations that the borders are shut. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out by air or by land. Right. In that instance, Phillips cannot perform his terms of the contract. I won't get what I want. Phillips cannot get what he wants. So, can I, in that instance, sue Phillips for damages? Well, what the law says is that the contract has been frustrated. So both parties remain as they are. Why is the contract called frustration at that stage? Why do we say the contract has been frustrating at that stage? Frustrated. So what's the specs of saying the contract has been frustrated? Okay, this is it generally. And I'll just read this out, right? What it says is that if the performance of a contract depends on the continued existence of a state of affairs, the destruction or disappearance of that state of affairs without the default of either of the parties. So that is where the key is. Where the key is. Was it Felix's fault that he didn't bring the goods? No. Was I the one that went to the border to shut the border so that Felix will not bring the goods so that I can sue him for damages? No. So the key thing here is that the event that happened was without any of the parties. It was neither my fault. It was neither Felix's fault. So in that instance, the contract has been frustrated. So two of us have been discharged from our obligations, right? Well, I think the question whether I paid Philip's money, you should understand what has happened. If he has invested it in paying other people for them to bring the goods, in most instances, I might not be able to get that money back because the issue that happened was not his fault, was not within his contemplation. So I know what you're thinking. Okay, so that means somebody gives me, I enter into a contract with someone, I have to find a way to make sure the contract is frustrated. Remember what I told you. Once the thing that happens that makes the contract impossible for either party to perform is caused by one of the parties, no longer frustration. Okay. I'll give you an example. Remember, we have agreed on an event. Then there's something that now happened, that made it impossible for the contract to be executed. If that thing that happened was caused by one of us, it is no longer frustration. It's actually breach. Right? It is no longer frustration. Then two, we must not, part of the terms of our agreement was, at the time we were drafting the agreement, we did not stipulate that if the borders were closed, in other words, we did not even consider the possibility that the border will be closed. If we state it in our agreement that if the border is closed, so and so will happen, then that incident is no longer frustration. I hope you understand me because this is important in understanding what is going to happen after this COVID-19. Not really after, we're already in after. But what is going to happen is a lot of contracts have been frustrated. A lot of people that have ordered for a lot of things out can't get it in. There are contracts that are time-bound, contracts that are supposed to perform within a particular period has not been performed. Let me give you a typical example of a contract that's supposed to be performed within a particular period. Let's say an employment contract, right? The contract was supposed to be performed between January and April. But January and April. Then in March, the government allowed lockdown, everybody stay at home. Okay, as an employee, what happens? What happens? Is your employer bound to pay you? Is your employer bound to pay you? That's going to cause some problems. Right, that's going to cause some problems. All right, I want to rent a house. I'm living in my former house. So we enter into agreements. I'm moving into the new house in March, in early April. Well, in April, the government says lockdown, no movement anywhere, right? What has happened? Can I move into the house? Of course not. So what has happened? There's been a frustration. Did we contemplate while we were entering into the agreement that the government will lock down movements? No. So in that instance, a perfect case of frustration, right? So when a contract is frustrated, as I've given the example in that form, what happens is that the parties have no obligation whatsoever. In the case of the rent, what might happen is that you might need to shift your rent to start counting from the time that the lockdown was lifted. But for that time that there was that lockdown, that's been frustrated and that cannot happen. So that's the key differentials on frustration, right? But the wahala with, do I do this? Let me not get into too much stuff when we talk about force majeure. But this is different from force majeure, really. Right? If you have issue with force majeure, just let me know. But this is different from force majeure. So basically, what we'll have in contrast situations, nobody expected COVID to come in. Nobody expected that there will be certain restrictions. Nobody expected that. Nobody contemplated that. So what applies there is that a lot of contracts have been frustrated. But remember what I said about waiver. What happens is that some of the parties might decide to waive whatever the conditions they are stated, and state that the contract should continue at the particular stage where they are in. Let them just continue. In that instance, they waived it, right? So Those are the 4 ways you can exit a contract. I'll repeat them. 3 of the ways is by the acts of the parties. 3 of the ways is acts of the party. 1 is by breach of the terms. 2 is by agreement between the parties. And then the third one, it's by performance. Then the other way you can exit a contract, which is through no fault of yours, is through what is called frustration. And I've given the circumstances that will be frustration. Yes, so those are the core areas that you can exit a contract. So the question then becomes, what I really like to contemplate is, there are contracts really that are time bound. What I mean time bound, we say that this contract will perform within a particular period. Or when we state that a contract will perform within a particular period, you understand that after the end of that period, that contract by itself just lapses, right? That's basically contracts by agreements and all the rest of them. Okay, now, so what do you do then when you are drafting your contract? Bearing in mind that we've discussed 3 terms, 3 issues. We'll discuss how you get into a contract, how your terms, how you should be careful with the terms, and then how to exit a contract. What do you need to do? What you need to do is, in every contract you get in, know when it begins, know what the terms are, and know when and how it ends. But remember, I said you cannot legislate for frustration. Okay, you can't legislate for that. Knows, so I'll repeat it again. What you should do, know when a contract begins, because we can get into a contract now and state that the contract will begin in 3 weeks' time, right? All right. Know when a contract begins, know what the terms of the contract, dictate it, be actively involved in what the terms of the contract is. And then the third one is, know how the contract ends. Know how the contract ends. What I normally would do is, I like to be in control of how it ends, apart from frustration. I like to be in control of how it ends. So that will guide my thinking in whatever I do. Yeah, thank you so much. That's where we'll wrap this up today. Thank you for being with me. If you have any questions, you could hit it up on the chat. If not, we could call it today. But I hope this has been impactful. Hope this has been impactful. Right. All right. I'm going to do certain things in the group anyway. Okay. All right. Thanks. We're going to do certain things in the group. We have a lot up coming up, but I'll share that in the group. But thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you for those of you that have been with me. I hope, like I said, I hope you've been imparted with some of the knowledge, and now you can go out and run with the knowledge and do what you need to do with it. Yeah, Ngozi, I've seen you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you too. You've been an extra blessing. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Felix, thank you. It's been quite insightful. Thank you for that. Take it and then run with it. Right. There are other issues that could be discussed about, but this is what this works for us for now. At least it gives us the understanding of some of the things we could do when we are negotiating a contract. Remember, and I'll end with this, remember, I always say, better, oral contract may be contracts, but always, 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 always get your contract in writing. It doesn't have to be in a very thorough structured form. It might have to be in very simple form, right? Get your contract in writing. Get your contract in writing. Should I say it again? Get your contract in writing. Thank you for joining me. Do have a wonderful rest. Thanks.